Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Welcome back to iRacing, and for the first time, welcome to the Red Bull Ring, or the A1 Ring, or the Österreich Ring, or whatever the hell we want to call this place. It's finally in iRacing, one of the world's, in my opinion, premier Grand Prix circuits, finally making it to iRacing. It joins Hockenheim in the class of tracks that we should have had a long time ago, and finally we do. There's the big bull that was added by Dietrich Mateschitz and co., and yeah, we're here. What else have we got here, though? We have also got a new car. We have got the Formula Vee here in iRacing, which is, in my opinion, a very curious addition to the sim because we already have the Skippy, which is a little Formula 2000 car. And now we've got this. We've got the Skippy, obviously. We've got the Dallara F3. We've got the US F2000 car. We have got the PM18, which is not quite an Indy Lights, but it's not quite an Indy Lights. It's something in the middle between F2000 and Indy Lights. But we now have Formula V to add to the class of the low to mid-tier open wheelers that we've got in the sim. And is there a place for it? Probably. It's probably going to be fun in some of the online sessions that we've got here, but we're just going to take a little bit of a look at this track and a little bit of a look at this car. The car doesn't have all that much to it. It weighs 825 pounds without the driver. It's got a four-cylinder engine, a flat four actually, out of a Volkswagen Beetle. Yes, the original Volkswagen Beetle. It's got the transmission out of a Volkswagen Beetle or a Carbon Ghia or a bus or any of the things that VW were making in the mid-century. It's got a tube-frame chassis. It's got drum brakes on the rear anyway. And it's a little nothing. It does barely 100 miles an hour. And around this track, it's a short lap, but it's probably going to take a little bit longer than you would think. It holds 6 gallons of fuel. In regulation spec here, we only seem to be able to add 5.3. So we'll add 5.3, and you can see that's about all she wrote for the setup. I mean, you got tire pressures, and you've got limited anti-roll bars and shock absorber adjustments, and of course you've got your fuel, and that's about it. It is a little entry-level runabout open wheeler, and here it is. There's not a whole lot to this thing, as you can well tell, and if we jump outside again, you'll be able to see some of the shots here of it. Yeah, that's the car. There's not a whole lot there. It's got a roll bar on top, and yeah, there is part of the tube frame chassis there sticking out of the front, to which the front suspension is mounted. You got push rods there going into dampers inside the nose structure. And yeah, a little bit of a roll cage. You got a fuel tank right behind you. You've got, they've had the common courtesy to put a padded seat in it, and that's about all she wrote. So yeah, it's, that's all it is. We do have the modern luxury of a digital dash, so we'll have a tachometer in there. We'll have water temperature, but that's about it. We'll have oil pressure there in the lower left on the gauge. We do have a fire bottle, and yeah, some switches for the ignition and the fuel pump, I would reckon. And that's about it. We got a 4-speed manual box, again, straight out of the Volkswagen Beetle of the mid-century. And we'll see what it does. We don't have slick tires, but we do have these sort of summer/semi-rain tires here that you would get on any road car if you wanted. Disc brakes in front. You can just see the single-pot calipers there with the flexible lines going into them. There is the track bar for the steering. You can see the knuckle there for the steering linkage articulating. That's cool. Any roll bars across the front. Yeah. Get it switched on, get the dash loaded up. In the setup screen, you can actually change the dash colors, which I found to be amusing. I like the blue, so we're going to keep it blue. And let's see, water temp is 170. Or is that oil temp? I think that's oil temp, actually. I don't know what the water temp is. If we even have water, this is, it was an air-cooled engine in its original application. I don't know if it is air-cooled still, but no matter. Get it fired. There it is. Yes, Carbon Ghia goodness there. If anybody watching has an old Carbon Ghia or a bus or an old Beetle, you probably would recognize that sound. It's just sort of chuffing away behind us, idling at, I don't know, about 800 or so. Kind of cool. 4-speed box. No pit lane speed limiter because who cares? And off we go. Right, we'll get rid of the virtual mirror because it's annoying me. And out onto the track, punch up fourth early. And there we go. You can see here, iRacing doing their typically good job with modeling everything. Obviously, this track is well laser scanned. FIA calls this little kink turn 2. I call it a kink. No brakes yet. That's turn 2 proper. That's where Nico Rosberg forgot which direction the track went in 2016. The back straight. This is a DRS zone for the Formula 1 guys. 90 miles an hour. We are cooking. There's their brakes. Got some life into them. They are just steel brakes, of course. Coming down into the stadium section. What have we here? Not bad, not bad. Nice camber in the road there, slightly on camber, but fairly level corner, all things considered, at least laterally. Out of the stadium, we got a lot of compression through the car here. This one, not so much, because the speeds are basically non-existent, but up the hill. Formula 1 qualifying laps, they're murdering that outside curb there on the exit. Over the crest. Dab of brakes in here. Come down, pick up the apex, let it go out wide a little bit early. Exit curbs. Don't go over them too hard if your name is Daniel Kiat. And to the exit, and there is the lap here at the, let's see, I'm going to call it the Österreich Ring, because nobody else calls it that anymore. Turn 1, very tricky in the faster cars. Upshift a bit early. Doesn't matter. The engine really runs out of steam at higher rev, so it doesn't really hurt you to shift early. At least not from the 3-4 upshift. And we're topping out at 86 miles per hour. Yeah. Second gear, apex curbs. Tend to stay away from those apex curbs and basically anything else, but in here we're going so slow and we have so little weight it hardly matters. There's full revs. Look at that, 7,000 RPM out of a 70-year-old Volkswagen engine. Track drops away, car responds nicely to those camber changes. Not bad. Yep, gearbox getting a little bit unruly. Understeer, how about that? Right, so we have some semblance of heat in this car. What does the car handle like? We know the racetrack. I've featured this racetrack probably hundreds of times on the channel, so that's not particularly important. What is important, though, is the car. What is it? Well, we know it's super light. We know it, let's see, is it worth more as an assembled car, or is it actually worth more in terms of the sum of its parts? Well, all in all, you could probably have one of these things assembled and ready to go for under $2,000. So it's definitely a very low cost option if you'd like to enter into open wheel racing. Like that. The engine, well, it's 70 plus years old, or at least the design is 70 plus years old. Carbureted, I believe, doesn't have a whole lot of performance. If we have 70 horsepower or so, that's an awful lot. I think we probably have less than that. If I remember correctly, the old Volkswagen Beetles in the World War II era and immediately thereafter, they were pushing out something like 35, 40 horsepower, so this has a little bit more than that, but not much. I would not at all be surprised if there are some lawnmowers out there that have more pep than this thing. But when it only weighs 900 pounds with you in it, you can actually go quite a long way with a very little bit of performance. Because the car is so light, it doesn't have an awful lot of inertia, which means it's incredibly responsive. Get onto the steering and it does something. Obviously, we're overwhelming the front tires by doing that, but it's not wallowy. It's not going to want to swap ends on you because of changes of direction. I mean, you know, see what it's doing. It's a little bit rear biased in terms of the weight because the engine and the transaxle, they're back there. But it's very tractable. It's pretty docile, at least when you're driving it sensibly. If you do want to get on it, though, things get very interesting. We mentioned, sitting in the pits, that this thing has drum brakes on the rear. Drums are very old brakes. They are, again, another 70, 80-year-old design at this point. Still used on some road cars today, still used on heavy trucks today because they can be very powerful, particularly when they're used as a parking brake. But they're not very good at heat management. They get very hot very fast, and they don't have an awful lot of airflow through them, so they get hot and they stay hot, which means your braking performance in this thing is going to vary depending on how long you've been driving. And it's not a question of wear per se, it's a question of heat. Does mean that you do have an awful lot of front bias. Obviously, you get that in most racing cars and most road cars anyway. If you have brake bias to the front, it tends to be more stable. You get understeer, but understeer is at least stable. But it's accentuated in something like this because obviously we've got discs in front, so they are just so much more powerful than the rears to begin with. And then when the rears do start to fade, then that's effectively the only thing you've got stopping the car. So you then get into the inverted pendulum situation because most of your weight, the little weight that there is at the back, which then means that if you do get into some high dynamic situations where the car is not quite stable, you're trying to set it up to go into a corner, particularly if you're coming onto the brakes or coming off of the brakes, those transitional zones are very important to manage here. The car will swap ends. The rear end will overtake the front end because, hey, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. And that external force that you're going to apply to it to persuade it in which direction it should go needs to be applied very precisely and judiciously by the driver. Which is why a car like this, despite being a little bit of a laugh in terms of its performance, even in comparison to some of the cars that are quite similar to it. For example, I've driven a car that was very similar to this. It was actually a Formula 2000 car, an old one, but Formula 2000 car nonetheless, had maybe 130, 140 horsepower, but did have a 4-speed box, was not running on slick tires, and it weighed not much more than this, about 1,000 pounds or so rather than 900. So it's similar enough to things that I've had some real-world experience with that it feels very much the same, apart from the speed, of course. The F2000, we were doing 130 or so. This, we're barely breaking 90 down start finish, but all in all, it feels quite convincing. Just a little dip of the clutch. That's all you need to get it into the next gear. You can float if you want. Obviously, manage your throttle correctly, but coming down, I do find it pays just to use the clutch rather than to try and float down. Do a floating upshift there, just come off of the gas and do it. But coming down, use the clutch and blip. We can demonstrate there. Just a little touch on the brakes. Got the rear end a little bit loose. The front end was able to pick up the slack, thankfully. But you can induce rotation by braking like that in your transitional zones where you're changing direction, and that is really going to be part of the secret formula to cracking a car like this. Again, it's all about energy management in this sort of thing, because you don't have the engine power to just pull you out of situations or to launch you out of the exit of a corner. You need to carry the momentum. Inertia is your friend and it's your enemy. He who manages inertia wins in something like this. So whether or not you're a novice or very highly experienced in open-wheeled cars like this, a car like this is going to be very good for you to revisit some of those fundamentals, because the way that this thing just transmits the little performance it has into the tarmac, it depends very greatly on you having a very solid command of car control fundamentals. If you're deficient in any sort of area, a car like this is definitely going to accentuate those deficiencies. Like, for example, in a lot of my videos, you see me sawing away at the wheel mid-corner sometimes. You can get away with that in cars that have big, fat, slick, sticky tires and a lot of aero, because they're just going to absorb all of those little perturbations and it just balances out to be pretty much a straight and level path. But in something like this, if I go into a corner like this, as I typically do, very aggressive on the front end, see, I just understeer wide. So you cannot overdrive this car to any degree. You've got to be right where it is. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, and you're going to look like an idiot. Use the brakes, use the steering, just be gentle with it. Put in a very gradual input and wait to see what the car does. You're not going to be waiting very long, but there is just enough of a lag time between you giving an input and the car's response for you to determine whether or not you're hitting the mark or not. It's also giving you feedback in terms of, is the car actually set up for the corner? Is it going to do what I want it to do? So it's again, it's a very good refresher on your fundamentals of car control. And of course, if you miss a gear like that, everything just becomes magnified in terms of the dynamics at the back end. Obviously, if you happen to lock the rears on a downshift or something, it's going to spin like a top. So, you know, it's very much a learning experience, even if you are very seasoned. Obviously, iRacing, they're always bringing new content. Every major season update, they bring new cars, they bring new tracks. They've done a great job of this in the last year or so. They brought us Hockenheim, they brought us the IR01, the Fantasy V10 Formula car, which is a blast. And now they've brought us this. They continue to diversify the fleet that's available to us here in this sim, and they continue to diversify the tracks that are available. I'm very happy that they are bringing some European circuits into the sim now, because we really need that, in my opinion. We had needed Hockenheim since the sim came to market in 2008. Glad we have that now, and this is another track very much in the mold of Hockenheim. It's a classic European venue. We needed it, and it's here, and they've done an absolutely splendid job. You can see all the curbing here. It's correct per 2020 anyway, and I'm sure in another couple of weeks when Formula One comes here, we're going to see that same curbing. Obviously, this is a laser scan. Obviously, they've taken the latest topographical data here, and they've taken the latest installment data in terms of what we've got here at the track. Those curbs were there in 2020, and they're probably still there right now. So fantastic to see all of that. Very much appreciate that as well. It just adds a little bit more to that authenticity factor. For example, Assetto Corsa also features this circuit, but the curbing, it's now outdated. The curbing that's there is no longer what's actually at the circuit. So it just sort of starts to drift away from the ultimate in terms of the ethereal realism factor. But ultimately, the car is an awful lot of fun. Again, this is going to be great with online events. I hope that we don't get people getting too serious with these things, because they are really just a bit of a laugh. I would say the the races there, they start to get a little bit more serious in terms of people really wanting to learn and really wanting to be consistent. This, I'm hoping that the rookie classes here are voluminous in terms of the entries, and I hope that they're widely available and accessible to everybody, particularly when you just come into the sim, because this car is free. And again, I think it's a great teaching aid. You will learn so much spending some time in this car. Lead out of the throttle, get some understeer there. Doesn't matter so much because we have tons of space to play with, because their speeds are pretty low, but it's awesome. It's really awesome. It's not awesome because it's blowing my mind in terms of the performance available. It's awesome because it's so communicative, it's so responsive, and it's so good. I mean, the smallest movements of the steering wheel have an impact in terms of what the car is going to do. You get that feedback instantly. And if what you're doing is trying to learn and trying to become a better sim driver, this is going to be a fantastic tool for you to use to learn car control, to understand weight dynamics and tires and brakes and everything that you got to do to be effective. It's going to be brilliant. Going to be absolutely brilliant, and I hope that people utilize this car for what it's intended. It's a great tool for you to learn the fundamentals of car control and by extension the fundamentals of sim racing. I think that there's a lot of fun to be had in this car, and I also think that it'll be popular. Again, it's free. It should be open to the rookie classes, and I hope it is, because we need more open wheel drivers in iRacing, and this is a fantastic way to get your feet wet in the world of open wheel racing. So I really hope that the car is a success, and people seem to like it so far from what I'm seeing. So hats off to iRacing for always thinking about some of the offbeat things that they can add to the sim, because it's greatly appreciated. And again, they do a great job all the time. And Austria, they gave us Austria finally. So happy on two fronts here. A happy F-man is a good F-man as far as I'm concerned. So that's it for what we've got here. A short video for you from iRacing. There will be hot laps here in the Formula Vee around Austria, so stay tuned for those. You want to get a sense of what the car sounds like from off-board. Sounds exactly like it does from on-board, but nonetheless, it's there, and we'll get the roll bar camera as well, so you get a little bit more of a look around the front end, see what the thing looks like, see the suspension working and all that. So until next time, stay tuned for the hot laps. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.